Hello guys, Erica Hargadon here from Babog. I have been getting lots of questions recently about 7-month-olds feeding overnight and whether that is acceptable or not. For me, there is 5 key factors when it comes to figuring out whether your 7-month-old still requires feeding overnight. It's very often that a baby of this age range will still require feeding overnight, but you've got to look at the factors at hand, and I'm going to run through those. So the first is your feeding preference, your milk feeding preference. If you are a bottle feeding parent, then it is probably likely that your 7-month-old can go through the night without a feed. But again, this is dependent on a range of other factors. Now, a breastfed baby, exclusively breastfed baby, possibly will still require feeding overnight at this age range. I would often see babies of this age range still requiring up to 2 feeds overnight where they are breastfed, and possibly holding on to 1 feed overnight up to maybe 9 months or even as far as 12 months, depending on the child. Next, after this, I would generally look at where they're at on their solids journey. So are they on solids? Are they well established on 3 solid meals a day? Has protein been introduced, and are they taking their solids well? Again, linking back in with the feeding preference, if you have a bottle fed baby who is on 3 solid meals a day and taking their bottles really well during the day, then they possibly do not require a feed overnight. But a breastfed baby on 3 solid meals a day, well established on protein, taking good milk feeds overnight, still might require 1 to 2 feeds overnight at this age range. Then I would look at, is there any dependency on feeding to sleep in the mix with this little one's sleep? So if your child is usually fed to sleep before they go to bed, then it is very likely that they will still wake for feeding overnight. And that might be more of a dependency than a feeding need, that they require refeeding in order for them to maintain their sleep. Naturally, children and adults come into light sleep at different stages overnight. And if your child comes into light sleep and has a dependency on feeding, then they may require refeeding to go back down to sleep again. And I would hear lots of reports of this happening every 2 hours after midnight for both breast and bottle fed babies where a dependency like this is in the mix. So with that in mind, your child may not still require feeding overnight, but is dependent on it for their sleep initiation and their sleep maintenance. So it might be a factor in order to fade out feeding if that's what you desire, to work on their ability to fall asleep without a dependency like this. I then would look at whether they are taking good milk feeds during the day and whether they're taking good milk feeds first thing in the morning. If your child is feeding overnight and still taking a really good milk feed in the morning, then they still may require those feeds overnight. But if they're feeding overnight and maybe taking a very small milk feed or refusing a milk feed in the morning, it's very likely that your 7-month-old maybe doesn't require necessarily the feeds overnight, and the feeds overnight are taking from their overall daytime milk intake. So perhaps it might be a time to look at shaving down or fading out those feeds overnight so that their daytime milk intake can increase. So you're balancing it out. Very often this would be referred to when you're breastfeeding as reverse cycling. Your child is taking more overnight feeds than daytime feeds. And again, last but not least, your child may not be ready to sleep through the night. They may still require the feeding. They may still require the comfort. So if your child is 7 months old and you're experiencing overnight feeding, look at these 5 key factors when trying to figure out whether the feeding overnight is maybe need-based, dependency-based, or habit-based. I hope you found that useful. If you're looking to find out more about me, check out babog.com. Thanks, guys.
you.